Fantastic. Thank you, Rich. I haven't done this before. All right. So we're going to be talking about the water budgets in general, and particularly water budget handbook, and we're going to be going relatively fast. But we do want to provide you this link on the very first slide to the water budget handbook story map. If what you hear today is interesting, you can check out the story map to find more information about this topic at kind of on your own pace. So let's get started. What we're going to do today, we're going to talk about water budgets, what they are and why to make one, some challenges we found associated with developing a water budget, as well as a little bit about the water budget handbook and how we hope it addresses those challenges. As many of you know, here in California at least, water is a limited resource that must be managed carefully. In fact, pretty much every water planning document in California talks about how important water is to it, including the recent water resilience portfolio, which emphasizes the need for a resilient and sustainable future. But the problem is we can't manage what we don't count. We can only ensure a sustainable future if we know what it is we have now. So why should we pay attention to water budgets, and why is it so important? Because a water budget allows us to count every component of the water cycle and really understand those areas in a way that is impossible without having a really detailed and documented water budget. California has a history of estimating water balances. It's done it for many years through the California Water Plan, but primarily the focus in the past has been on supply and use. With the transition to sustainability and resilience being so important, it's very important to take a step back and look at the entire hydrologic cycle and the connection of flows as they go from one system to another. In 2014, the legislature passed the Sustainable Ground Management Act, which is a really influential piece of legislation that also, among other things, codified a definition for water budgets. Water budget means an accounting of the total groundwater and surface water entering and leaving a basin, including the changes in the amount of water stored. This is a really significant legislation. As well, in 2018, the legislature again passed another bill, Assembly Bill 1668, that mentioned water budgets, where it says an agricultural water supplier shall report their annual water budget, and that means a quantification of all inflow and outflow components of the service area, clearly recognizing the importance of a water budget. However, water budgeting is not a phenomenon that's restricted to just legislation. It's actually important in really all parts of water management. As mentioned by Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed. Additionally, there's a nice quote from the USGS here. The water budget is an accounting of the rates of water movement and the change in water storage in all parts of the atmosphere, land surface, and subsurface. And I'll add to that my thoughts that a water budget is critical for understanding the flows of water in your area. And this is kind of the baseline step to any other management actions, especially in the chaotic future where things are changing and we have more interesting times we haven't seen before, including more frequent droughts and other issues. Understanding what you currently have will help you adapt better to changing conditions. So when exploring these concepts, DWR conducted 2 pilot projects to understand the issues related to water budget development, one in the Tulare Lake region and one in the Central Coast region of California. What we found was a lot of challenges to water budget development. First, we could not find, or there was not a single comprehensive reference that was available in water budgeting. And really, it's not too surprising as water budgeting touches a lot of different fields of work, as you have to understand what's coming from the atmosphere, how it's being used, how it's being routed around various engineered systems, and then how it interacts with natural systems, including the ground and eventually the ocean. The hydrologic cycle is often considered in a very fragmented way. Water district managers look at the water budget, look at the system through one lens, which is different from reservoir operators or groundwater basin managers. And oftentimes water budgets created by these groups are specific to their purpose and therefore can't be used by the other groups. And this is unfortunate because it limits communication and ends up with us operating in our own silos. Additionally, definitions can be very inconsistent between different terms. Different terms are used for different purposes, and in fact, sometimes the same term is used in totally different ways. I would invite you to study the use of the word percolation, as it can mean many different things depending on who's using it. This is one of the observations we made. The non-standard ways for accounting water are often practiced, which can be really a challenge when trying to communicate, for say, across region boundaries or communicate from one study to another. There's no guidance on, there's no great guidance on choosing a modeling approach versus a non-modeling approach, as well as helping people who may be less proficient in water budget accounting or are trying to develop water budget for the first time to understand what the pros and cons of these approaches are and how to best move forward with the resources they have. Additionally, data sources that would be useful for water budget development are currently not organized in any fashion, and they're spread out, and it really takes quite a bit of knowledge to know what data sources could be used for what. And poor documentation has been always a reoccurring key, which limits the effectiveness of water budgets that are developed in providing insights and understanding to future people who come along to read them. So the Water Budget Handbook is a single volume technical reference that tries to address these issues. It includes a variety of the innovations that are listed here. We'll walk through those. And its goal is to provide provide assistance to people trying to develop water budgets. Before we go into that, though, I do want to recognize that the water budget was the result of a lot of work by a group of people who worked very hard on it, including staff at DWR, as well as staff at Woodard and Curran. And we received a lot of assistance from our reviewers who are very important in the water budget development, which includes staff from multiple programs within DWR, as well as from the State Water Resource Control Board, USGS, and academia. We would not have been able to create the document we did without the help of these people. And so it's very important to recognize their assistance. Additionally, I also want to mention that a quite aggressive communication plan was pursued in order to refine the water budget and hopefully build broad consensus. More work needs to be done, but we can see here a lot of meetings that happen internally, public meetings that happen after the handbook release, as well as engagement at various public venues and organizations. So we'll take you on a quick tour of the handbook. It's a rather imposing document, currently sitting at over 400 pages, but if you understand how the sections are broken out, it can be navigated much more easily and efficiently to get the information you need out of it. So section 1 kind of deals with the basics of water budgets. In this, you'll find the 3D schematic, which is the kind of underpinning of all the other work that comes after that. This is a three-dimensional representation of the water budget components using a systems approach, provides a comprehensive accounting of inflows to and outflows from the three interacting systems: the land surface, the surface water system, and the groundwater system, including critical flows that happen within those systems. Also included in this section is a common vocabulary that, if used, would eliminate inconsistencies in definitions of components. The definition attempted a clear definition for every single element that you saw in the previous 3D schematic. And finally, there's a standardized water accounting template in the handbook that is included to help organize and communicate water budgets in a consistent way. This is not tied to any one model, and thus later on we'll provide some translation from various models that do exist into this kind of format. Section 2 primarily deals with considerations when you're developing a water budget, including many considerations, but a few we'll highlight here include some decision trees to help water resource managers identify what kind of water budget to develop and how to go about doing so, as well as detailed guidance on documentation of water budgets that will help create a knowledge base for use by other water resource practitioners or anybody else who might come across this water budget and want to gain value out of it later. Section 3, 4, and 5 are each structured very similarly. Starting off section 3, we'll talk about the land system. We'll walk through every component you see here on this figure and provide multiple methods for estimation, sources of information to inform those methods, steps, and examples for these components so they could be estimated in development of a water budget. In the land service, we also recognize the different types of managed land use and how those can affect your water budget terms, as seen in the pictures here. Section 4 is around the surface water system, and similarly to Section 3, walks through each of the components with methods, estimation techniques, and data sources. And the same for Section 5, except for the groundwater system. Section 6 is a case study of using the non-modeling approach. Before I move on, in these sections, it's not expected that you read Sections 3, 4, and 5 from cover to cover. Instead, all the relevant information is provided in each subsection for the estimation of that subsection. So the idea is, as you wanted to estimate a component, you would go to that subsection, you would use it, and then you would go back to looking at your water budget, rather than trying to read these sections from cover to cover. Section 6 is a case study for the non-modeling approach, where we walk through development of a water budget in a real region in California. While the data in this section is not meant to be authoritative, it's just meant to be an example of how someone might walk through creating a non-modeling approach water budget. At the end of that section, we've included a worked out example of developing it with numbers and sample documentation for how you might document all your calculations that go into your water budget. Section 7 of the handbook is a case study for the integrated water flow model. If you had a developed integrated water flow model, this section would walk you through how to convert from your numbers from that model into the water budget handbook standard accounting template in order to improve communication with other water budgets that may not use that model. We do a similar process for Section 8 for the one water hydroelectric flow model from USGS. This walks through kind of the version 1 of that model. Although, as you might know, there is recently released a version 2 or an updated version of that model from USGS, and the handbook does include some text boxes identifying elements of one water hydroelectric flow model that have changed from version 1 to 2. And finally, in Section 9, the data resources directory identifies data sources and catalogs 61 different sources of data with a cross-reference table to help users identify which sources can be used in estimation of which components. Addition to that cross table is a resource page that includes a 1 or 2 page summary of each of those data sources with relevant information like who owns the data set, what could it be used for, what's the basic description of it, where you can find the data, and various other things that could be useful in the consideration of data sources. The handbook could be used for developing to develop water budgets for many different purposes. One of the ones I'll mention that I think is interesting and not immediately obvious is identifying data gaps. By documenting what data you have and what you know about the area in your area, you'll also identify where you don't have data you'd like to have and how you might go about developing that. This again is another example of how you can become more resilient and know where you need data, which will help you meet challenges in the future. Where do we want to go next from here? We'd like to go the goal is to build upon the water budget handbook and build a comprehensive water accounting system. Building such a system would require 3 things: people, processes, and technology. Successful implementation of a water accounting system, or even the water budget handbook itself, would require broad agency and stakeholder buy-in and training. It's important that the tools we develop are actually useful for the people who might be using them, and thus the communication back and forth on the elements of the handbook. The handbook is meant to be a living document and to grow and change with the field, not to be a static document. And training would be available. We're hoping to provide training on document 2 and how to better use it. Additionally, to implement a water accounting system, the water budget handbook's foundational elements need to be enhanced. As we weren't able to cover everything in the handbook, we'd hope to include elements like those additional guides shown on this slide, which would be done in collaboration with other state agencies and local partners, and could lead to increased understanding and hopefully some training programs on these. And finally, technology is a critical part in bringing all water budget related information into a visualization and communication framework. WR developed a preliminary water budget dashboard as part of the Tulare Lake Hydrologic Region pilot. And our hope is that we will develop a water budget accounting tool that would allow anybody using kind of standardized accounting template to quickly visualize and communicate their water budget with stakeholders and others. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this presentation. The contact information for Abdul and myself is here, as well as some related links if you're interested in knowing more about the handbook. And if you'd like a copy of the handbook, we do have a limited number of physical copies available, which we'd be happy to provide, get to you somehow through the mail. It may take us a little while because of COVID-19, but if you email us, we will do our best to get you a copy of the handbook.
Paul Shipman, that was very nicely done. And that presentation and the budget work itself is very rich and multidimensional. If people would fire questions into the chat room, Paul, are you willing, or Abdul, to take a few questions now? Would that be all right?
Of course.
Good.
Yeah.
There's one question that came from Mariana Grossman, and then Alexandra Sokol would like to hear the answer too. Does the water budget take into consideration the impact of sea level rise on groundwater levels? In other words, saltwater infiltration would be part of that, or pressure back to raise groundwater level would be another.
That's a great question. Abdul, do you want to take that first, or do you want me to answer it?
No, I can take that first. So as we were trying to develop the water budget handbook, we realized that to address everything which is in the hydrologic cycle is a long order. It's a very long order. So some of the things, more difficult things, for example, the seawater intrusion, we do have a textual description in terms of how those can be addressed, but we did not directly address it. And actually, Paul can talk about it a little bit more. Currently in DWR, we are actually in the midst of doing a pilot where the information we generate as part of the California Water Plan to see how we can migrate that to this 3D systems water budget framework. And one of the big issues which emerged is because when we consider, say, interior region, the issue of seawater intrusion is not an issue really most of the time. But as we are considering California as a whole, obviously then, areas which are sort of the adjacent to our, the ocean system, that become really important. So we are actually putting some thoughts right now in terms of how we can address the issue of seawater intrusion, because seawater intrusion has connotation for a water budget zone. It's an inflow. The problem is this inflow cannot be necessarily considered a potable supply, meaning that it can artificially it will physically it will raise the groundwater level, but that does not add to the usable quantity of groundwater resources. So at the moment, actually, we are sort of thinking about how best to address this issue without overcomplicating the current handbook construct. And as Paul showed, that several issues came. For example, in our 3D system, we have just one inflow, right? But this one flow actually can be a combination of multiple, sort of quantities. So we are considering something called how can we index that information? And the other critique was that we do not have any guidance for how do you know how good the estimate is, in terms of uncertainty of individual water budget component and also the overall water budget. So the way we are addressing these issues right now at the moment, rather than putting everything into the handbook, we're going to create these additional supporting guides. For example, there could be a water budget indexing guide. And similarly, for the seawater intrusion, our thought process is not fully evolved at the moment, but maybe that would be one way to address it, that we create a guide. If there are seawater intrusion, how does the computational scheme change, and what are some of the methods which will allow us to do that computation? And so this is primarily looking at it from a non-modeling approach. However, when we extract information from a model, the seawater intrusion component is already embedded in the model simulation. So it's an extraction of that information so that it can we can then put it into the water budget accounting template in the context of that 3D systems framework. Paul, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, again, we'd like the document to become a living document that reflects the kind of the knowledge base of the larger practitioner group that does water budgets. So as you have thoughts on elements like seawater intrusion, we'd love to hear them so that we can improve how the handbook deals with those things right now. Thank you. Sorry, my cat had to walk in front of the screen.
Oh, it's okay. The cat might get the award for Best Supporting Actor. You never know. Other questions or comments? One from, I see a couple actually. Let me get the right, okay. John Wells, do you want to say your question or do you want me to read it?
I'll be happy to say it. I mean, there's always a struggle between human activity, and we like certainty and predictability, and we deal with things like average flows or flow statistics that are single numbers, which you kind of need for a budget. How do you deal with the need to recognize that nature runs on variability and flexibility, including flood flows or low flows? It doesn't deal with average flows per se. It deals with a variability, and it needs that variability. So how do you build into a budget the need to have variability, the need that nature has to have variability?
Paul, you want to go first, then I can chime in?
Sure, I'll tackle it from maybe a slightly different point. So one of the things we'd like to do actually is to create a really robust and flexible accounting system that would allow, indexing system, not beyond the accounting system, that would allow you to change things to meet the needs that you have, but still have a kind of digital identifier that would go with it that would allow it to be summed up to different levels. So you could do a water budget on whatever scale was appropriate for the analysis you were doing, but then aggregate it up to, say, an analysis level somebody else needed. Our hope is that would allow really increased communication and usefulness of various water budgets for multiple purposes. Abdul, you wanted to expand also, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Paul, while I'm talking, if you can you bring out the water budget sort of like the dashboard pilot, see whether we can share that for a minute or two. But John, the way this framework is established, it's not about average flow. You can use average flow, that's okay. But the way we are looking at it, if you have daily sets of data, we could, using the framework, one could develop daily water budgets. If people have monthly data, we could use monthly water budget, which will be sort of moving through time. And then, for example, if you have annual data, and Paul is trying to load one of the things we did for the Tulare Lake hydrologic region, the pilot, if you have annual data, then you can move through annual data. So our ultimate sort of through both temporal and then geographical, this indexing, our goal is to create this indexing where you develop the water budget at the highest level of resolution of data available, but then have the opportunity to roll it up based on your needs or understanding. And similarly for spatial, develop it for the highest resolution a special data set, but then also have the opportunity to roll up as necessary. So this is a very flexible, I mean, the intent is to develop a very flexible framework which can be used by a wide range of water resources practitioners.
So you might have seasonality. You might have 4 water budgets, one for spring, summer, fall, and winter, or if you had different requirements or different expectations.
Yes, if you so wish.
And then the other question, which sort of is the looming question, is what about climate change affecting everything? So if you no longer have a deep snowpack in the northern part of California or in the Sierra, wherever you guys have your snowpacks, and you used to count on that to melt slowly over the spring months, and your statistics might lie to you if you go back too far because they wouldn't have captured the change in climate, perhaps. How do you cope with that?
And actually, this is actually a fantastic question, and this is really the goal of this framework. You're agnostic to those things. It's a construct. So if no longer most of the inflow is coming from snow, then that information will be used in the framework, whatever the current set of information is. And as an aside, I'm going to just mention this as part of the California Water Plan process. We have a particular task which actually Paul Shipman is leading, where we actually look at future scenarios. And these future scenarios is a function of essentially 3 things: population growth, and then land use change, and then also climate change. So what our goal is for California Water Plan Update 2023 is, can we look at, based on the available data, what would be the sort of condition or the state of water budget today, and then look at this future scenario analysis and essentially look at the same data set, but based on those changes of land use, population growth, and climate change, and maybe look at how the water budget actually changes, say, for example, 2050, and then our goal is to go up to 2070 for a 50-year sort of future planning horizon. So, and we do not know how it would look, but that would be, in our view, using this construct, if we can come up with water budget today, then 2050, and then 2070, it should show something. And we do not know what that difference or change would be. But we are really looking forward to see, can we come up with, as part of the future scenario analysis, this comparison of future budgets versus current water budgets.
Okay, thank you.
This is good. That was good. I think I need to move on. We have a comment that I didn't get to and a question about hydrological systems that we didn't get to, but there may be a chance to revisit them in the final section where we're talking about what would you like to see in future workshops and what would you like to offer to future workshops. So any final comment, Paul or Abdul, and then I'll call on Stan Bronson to give his presentation.
Paul, go.
Nothing from me. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our work.
Okay, it was good. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. Stan Bronson, you are a co-host. You can share. And if everybody's on speaker view any minute now, Stan Bronson will appear.
I suppose so. Thank you, David. The thing that I'm going to be talking about, I thought it was going to go last, but because of a global perspective, but a little bit of an update from ACRE and also some ideas on how to create public-private partnerships to get things done. So I'm going to share the screen. And did it pop on?
We're all go.
Okay.
Perfect.
For some of you know what ACRE is, some of you don't. It's a organization that stands for the acronym stands for the Alliance for Climate Resilient Earth. It's located at an initiative of the Stimson Center, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. Stimson was ranked overall this February and I tried to put in things that are new since we've visited. It was ranked number 10 in think tanks out of 2,000 rated by University of Pennsylvania. And it's number 2 in the world in innovation. We're a little over a year old now. We started out with 30 organizations. And it's interesting that the very first member of ACRE was the Sustainable and Resilient Resources Roundtable. So we are very appreciative of this organization for that leap of faith that they took. And then now we're over 120 members, and they range from the one person organization. We don't have any members that are individuals, but one person or two person companies. Up to today, we just signed up the largest bank in the world outside of China, which is HSBC. This is the original group that put ACRE together at the Stimson Center. So ACRE is an alliance of organizations that develops partnerships, initiatives, projects, and programs to reduce the risk of climate-driven events. We don't address directly climate change, but what we address is how do you create resilience in order to reduce the risk that nobody likes to get whacked. Nobody likes to have floods and droughts and fires and that type of thing. We're very bottom up and member driven. Our mission is to enhance yours. We ask this question to every member that joins ACRE, and that is, what does your organization want to bring to the ACRE table? You want to scale through collaboration and share with the world. So we're very much a sharing organization. Members come from all sectors. We're pretty heavy on the private and academic side, although we do have quite a lot of NGOs and government. We're the only organization in the world with 7 national labs as founding members. We're very proud of that. And then we have 2 overarching aspirations to accelerate the pace of play, and that is defragment the space and de-silo the space to create better collaboration between sectors. This is the center of ACRE. We're divided into areas of focus, which have been turning into working groups. And these are the 8 areas that we work in, and every member chooses a area of focus they want to work in. And obviously, if you're an engineering firm like Tetra Tech, which I saw some folks here on today from Tetra Tech, which is a member, then you're going to pick infrastructure. But we also like to have members pick secondary and third areas of focus that they want to work in, so that we get cross-pollination between the sectors. And this is that de-siloing space that we want to engage in. So an engineering firm might choose as their secondary working group a finance and institutional investment group that says, once we build something, who's going to pay for it? Or once we build something, who's going to insure it, with the insurance working groups. This is 101 of the 120 something we have now. I guess I can make them into so small you can't see them. And well, you'll see some of the largest corporations in the world there, and about 25 universities or so are involved with us. Wanted to bring up a strategic partnership that is our biggest, and that is with the American Society of Civil Engineers. American Society of Civil Engineers has come out with a new infrastructure resilience standard that was released the last year. It came out of a public comment period of 45 days ending January 25th. And our job is to assist ASCE in global adoption. And what is interesting from this perspective is that this standard is not just about buildings and roads and bridges. This standard has chapters in it that cover the natural system. It covers water. It covers even how you integrate equity into a standard like this. We are working with Global Covenant of Mayors and also with a lot of the royal societies, especially in England and the Netherlands, of engineering, and an organization called the International Federation of Engineering Organizations, which is in Paris. We have 6 other collaborations, or excuse me, partnerships that are in process. I'll mention 2 of them. One is the Collaboration for Climate Resilient Investment. It's a organization of about 62 members, and those 62 members are people that invest in many, many different things, but the 62 members, which include people like Wells Fargo and HSBC and Lloyd's, they have a total asset under management of $10 trillion. So they're a force to be reckoned with, and we have an MOU that we're working with getting them to sign, and we'll sign it eventually. We have a amazing relationship now with the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and we have a agreement with that organization that represents the Prince in working with him on his things that he loves to do. One of those is, I'll talk about in a minute, which is working with small island states. We have a MOU also that's being developed with the Global Center for Adaptation. You can take a look at gca.org. They were developed by the Netherlands. We are working with NASA's Interagency Forum on Climate and Adaptation. There is a move about underfoot that where we would help administer that for NASA. We're still working on that. We have obviously the relationship we very much enjoy with this organization, with the Sustainable and Resilient Resources Roundtable. And then we have a journal called Solutions Journal that Steve Smith, who just joined us a few minutes ago, I saw where he popped in, has submitted the first article. If you get a chance, read it. It is really good. It's called it's an article on domestic resilience. It appeared in the December Solutions Journal, I believe. I should have gone through these. We do have some initiatives that are in-house, and the first one I'll tell you about is really, I think it's going to be just dynamite. It's called the Diplomatic Council for Climate Resilience. It is using the embassies in DC and the ambassadors there and their designates to globally deliver the initiatives and projects and programs that ACRE works on. And we have a host committee that is composed of Canada, the Netherlands, the UK. What this does is has once a month rotating sessions, beginning with the UK in the last part of May is when the UK wants to do the first one. We kind of do the background work for this, and then there has been suggested by the UN that they would love to see future chapters at the UN of this diplomatic council. This has never been done before by anybody, so we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants on this one, but obviously it's one that we see great potential in, especially since it gives a direct line to every capital in the world. So I'm going to talk just briefly about a concept that we're working on called enterprise partnerships. Enterprise partnerships are where organizations come together to create critical mass because of the fact that they're too small in order to make a big impact. Back in the 80s, when and this the model that we used for this is the Dutch Delta Works. Back in the 80s, the Dutch came up with the idea of we've got to do something to stop the flooding from especially big storm surge events. And so they created a thing called the Delta Works, where they put together very large storm surge barriers. And in the beginning of the 2000s is when they completed some of the work. But the problem was that they didn't have any organizations or companies that were big enough to do that scale of work. So what they did is they formed partnerships that combined companies and combined organizations and combined government government agencies into a single unit. And then all of a sudden they had the oomph to do it because of how they did that combination. MIT is famous for doing this. They do the same thing. They do the research at MIT, and then they do spin-offs that create enterprise partnerships. And then probably in America, the most famous one that does this is Scripps La Jolla, in which Scripps does not make medicine. They create the chemistry, and then they spin off a company that'll create the medicine. So one of the things that you have to do when you do something like this, you have to identify solutions. Then you identify organizations that are working on these solutions, and you facilitate bringing together the organizations, and they form the partnerships themselves. So these can be temporary or permanent. They can be for-profit or not for-profit. The Dutch, whenever the project was done, they disbanded the partnerships. They took them apart. Couple of them stayed together. One that stayed together is called Deltaris, which is their very famous national lab for water. And what this does is that when you get enough together that you can combine forces and combine what you're doing, then it creates enough critical mass and the ability to scale to have a global impact. So whenever I'm going to give you an example of one we're working on right now, identifying specific needs. Islands have a real problem with energy sources. You have to, whenever you have an island that is out in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, wherever it is, it's got to be supplied with energy, usually by ship. And so if you're running a power plant on an island, then you've got to have a constant supply of diesel to run an electric plant. Very little renewables. One of the reasons is a lack of space, and also so there's other reasons as to why renewables have not caught on in islands like they could. There is an organization called the Small Island Developing States, or SIDS DOC. The DOC part of SIDS DOC is their energy and environment division, and SIDS is a UN unit. SIDS DOC was formed about 2015. It has 32 island nations in it, and it's considered a voting bloc in the UN. SIDS is comprised of the prime ministers with a secretary general named Al Binger, and it was formed in 2015 by a lot of the work that was laid down by the Clinton Foundation. We signed on April 10th a memorandum of agreement with SIDS-DOC and to help them out with several issues. So here's an example of how a partnership can be developed that does this. Ocean energy has been worked on for quite a while, and it's about the same place as wind and solar was in the mid-90s. It's about 25 years behind. There's a lot of small scale pilot demonstration programs all over the world. Australia has a lot of them. The UK has some. $41 million was given to Oregon State University to put a ocean energy testing site where the Columbia hits the Pacific. And so we said, let's take a look at how many ACRE members are doing work on ocean energy. And we found actually 8. So the 2 biggest ones are Lockheed Martin and Siemens. There are 2 national labs that are members that are doing work on ocean energy, 3 universities, including Oregon State, and then Deltaris, which is the National Water Lab of the Netherlands. So this became a perfect scenario for creating an enterprise partnership. And so the idea behind this would be that the partners would come together to form a partnership. And then all of a sudden you would have enough critical mass to scale things up, and so that you could have an impact and get things done. If you look at the ocean energy pilot programs that are in Australia, they're servicing 100 people. But how do we get it where you service 1 million? And so this is one of the ways that you can do it. So I'm going to stop there and just say thank you for the opportunity, and I can take questions now or later, David.
You might have the opportunity to do both, Stan. I don't see any questions in the chat room yet. Is there anybody that has one they'd like to ask through their microphone?
Rich has one.
Yeah, I used the fancy raised my hand feature. So Stan, can you maybe elaborate a little? It looks like there is some significant role for the U.S. federal government in the activities you're describing here. And I was just wondering if you could say something a little bit more on what that federal government role is, and maybe the current administration and the infrastructure plan. How is that feeding into what ACRE is trying to accomplish?
Well, we have some very unique opportunities with obviously the national labs, but another one that we're doing at the federal level is with the Army Corps of Engineers. And so the Army Corps is very interested in what we're doing. David, is it okay if someone comments? Can I call on somebody to comment?
Well, it's okay with me, but we will see in a moment whether it's okay with them.
I was wondering if Steve Smith could just make a comment on he's been working with us on the Army Corps partnership and some of the opportunities that might present itself with the Army Corps. Steve, are you around?
Yeah, I'm here. I think I can't answer the question yet, but we'll learn that. I just sent something to Stan this morning where Army has found a way to make plastic biodegradable so it will biodegrade in like 3 years, which is remarkable. But how do we get that stuff? So that's something which I've kind of posed to Stan. How can we set up some sort of data management thing so we can get data from all these national laboratories in the Army Corps and find out answers to our questions? So I can't answer that specific question, but I know that we need to have some way to do that so that all of our members, if they have a question like that, can go in and ask and find out, is the Army working on it? Is Lincoln Labs working on it? Is any number of different places. So I can't answer the question directly right now, though. They might, I'm not sure.
Okay. I think that one of the things that's quite interesting is that I asked when Steve and I and 2 others from ACRE were on a very large conference call with I don't know, there were 15 or 18 people from the Army Corps on this call a couple weeks ago. And I said, have you guys ever thought about how many labs do you have that are doing research? And they said 7. And I said, have you guys ever thought about doing partnerships with the DOE labs so that you don't reinvent the wheel and you kind of get some synergies going there? Long silence on the line. They said, no. And then I thought, okay, wouldn't that be cool if you could do that? So that's one of the things we brought up with them, is to connect those labs together.
Good. That was very good. Anybody else? Okay. I think that we can afford to have a 2-minute pause while people take care of biological needs, those of you that drank a ton of tea or coffee in the last hour. And then in about 2 minutes, I'll call on Rich Jurisic to launch his presentation. Does that work for you, Rich?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So you got 115 seconds left for a pause.
And David, I'll just go ahead and bring up my presentation.
That's fine. Okay, I think you could gently launch into it.
All right, sounds good. So for those that don't know me, my name is Rich Jurisic. I'm a principal engineer with the Colorado River Board of California. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Colorado River Basin. So this is kind of an interstate kind of focus of our webinar today. And really, I'm going to focus on two things in my presentation, really the kind of current conditions, say something a little bit about the current hydrology, and then the rest of the discussion will be on management and decision-making within the basin. And let's see if I can forward slides here. There we go. So these are the kind of the areas I'm going to touch on. Really going to keep my discussion fairly high level and a kind of a broad overview. So just a little bit about the agency I work with. So the board is actually a state agency, a California state agency. Very small agency. We have 11 full-time staff. We are essentially staffed to a board. So we have a 10-member board that we support, including the 6 agencies, highlighted there with the bullet points. These are all California water district agencies that have water and/or power rights to the Colorado River. In addition to those 6 agencies, we also have 2 board members are appointed by the governor, generally for the representing the public. And then we also have designees from the Department of Water Resources and the Department of Fish and Wildlife that serve on the board. Our agency is completely funded by those 6 agencies highlighted there. And so we don't use any of the state's general fund to operate. And our day-to-day activities are really tracking the different activities within the basin and really representing California on different things related to the Colorado River. And I'm not going to go into all the kind of the topics here for this presentation, just given the time, but I will touch on some of them. But I do want to highlight some of the ones I won't get into. There is a really strong connection between management of the Colorado River and the conditions at the Salton Sea within California. So the Salton Sea is a desert sea that is essentially currently fed by runoff from agricultural areas served by the Colorado River. And so as we become more and more efficient in the way we manage those agricultural areas, that has a reducing effect on the amount of runoff, obviously, that reaches the sea. And there have been a number of impacts to the Salton Sea. Essentially, it's shrinking through evaporation, and that causes exposure of lake bed and seabed, and it results in dust and pollution associated with that. So just wanted to highlight that. I won't get into a lot on the endangered species. I'll talk a little bit about some of the programs in place for that. And then also other issues are related to the Colorado River Delta as it reaches the Sea of Cortez in Mexico, and then also stakeholder inclusion. As most folks in the region know, the Colorado River does no longer reach the Sea of Cortez in Mexico, although obviously historically that was its outflow. But now under current conditions, so much water is used that the water rarely will flow all the way to the Sea of Cortez. And then, so this is just an overview. I do want to spend a few minutes going through this. This is a kind of a snapshot of the basin. And if you can see my mouse here, the Colorado River kind of has its headwaters in the Rockies in the northern part of the state of Colorado. It flows downstream to Glen Canyon Dam, Lake Powell. Lake Powell is one of the largest reservoirs in the country at 24.3 million acre feet. It's also upstream. You have the Green River that joins the Colorado River. That's another major tributary in the upper basin. The river flows, well, just below Glen Canyon Dam is Leaf Ferry, and that is the legal dividing point between the upper basin and the lower basin. The upper basin is comprised of 4 what we call upper division states, so Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. And then the lower basin is comprised of the 3 lower basin states, Nevada, Arizona, and California. So the river flows from Glen Canyon Dam through Grand Canyon National Park to Lake Mead and Hoover Dam. And then Hoover Dam is 26 million acre feet capacity. So again, another one of these huge reservoirs, one of the largest in the United States. Lake Mead is the diversion point for southern Nevada. So, you know, the water supply for Las Vegas and surrounding areas, they take their supply from Lake Mead. Downstream of Lake Mead is Parker Dam. And Parker Dam is the diversion point for the Colorado River Aqueduct that pulls water into the Southern California coastal plain, where I'm located here in Glendale. It's also a diversion point for the Central Arizona Project, which provides supplies for Phoenix and Tucson and surrounding areas. From Parker Dam and Lake Havasu, the river flows to Imperial Dam, and that's the diversion point right at the border, right near the border, I should say. Diversion point for the All-American Canal, which supplies irrigation water to the Imperial Valley and the Coachella Valley. And you can see the Salton Sea here, which is the areas that are receiving that Salton Sea, that agricultural runoff. Just in terms of the big picture, the basin supports 40 million people, and for both, urban agricultural supplies. There's over 5.5 million acres of irrigated agricultural within the U.S., and then another 500,000 acres of irrigated agricultural within Mexico. So just to give you some perspective on that. And I did want to highlight also one last thing is these hatched areas that you see on the map. These are areas located outside the basin, but receive, all or part of their supply from the Colorado River. So you can see all states, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and California, we all have supplies that are imported from the Colorado River basin. So now I want to, with that background, get a little bit into some of the current conditions. And I want to point out these next, most of these slides I'm showing are from the Bureau of Reclamation, and they just do a really top-notch job of highlighting the information, the data, the water budgets associated with the Colorado River. And this is one of the figures that they've come out with showing the supply, kind of the supply and demand within the basin. The blue line is the annual basin supply, looking for the natural flow within the basin, which I believe is they're showing it right at the end of the system at Imperial Dam. And the darker blue line is the 10-year moving average. And so you can see the supply over time. It has been kind of, if you look more recently, there's been this kind of long dry period from the 80s to present. And I'll say something a little bit more about that in a minute. And then you can see the demands in the basin. The darker orangish line is the 10-year moving average on the demands within the basin. And then you can see right here we hit the 2000 period, and the demands are up above the supply line. So that's where we really pulled heavily from the main reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, to meet the demands in the system. And that basically was reflected in steep decline in the storage in those reservoirs. Okay, this is a recent figure that Reclamation put together, and it puts showing the historical drought and provides a little bit of information on it. So what they used as their period of record is basically the historical natural flow again at Lee's Ferry. So if you remember, Lee Ferry is the dividing point between the two basins. And so this is looking at the natural flow at Lee's Ferry, which is just, I believe, upstream of Lee Ferry. So this is the historical record for that is 1906 through 2021, so to present. And this is the data that is often used by Reclamation when they're doing planning or modeling studies for the basin. And what they did is they took that data and they looked at different time slices to see where the actual natural flow followed for different time slices. So for this first column here, this is just an annual value. So this is just showing the annual value across that 115 years and where those values fall. So you can see a low from just over 5 million acre feet to up to 25 million or close to 25 million acre feet in a year. And then they looked at different time sequences. So here's a 5-year, this would really say 2000 through 2004, but this is a 5-year slice of data. So looking at different segments of 5 years, 10 years, and then out at 22 years is the most recent. And essentially what we're seeing here is that if you look at the 10-year period, both the 2000 through 2009 and the 2012 through 2021 periods are kind of the driest 10-year periods we've seen on the river over this 115-year record. And then also, if you look at the most recent 22-year period, we're essentially in the driest 22-year period on record. So again, that has dramatic impacts on the water supply system in the basin. And then to kind of drill out a little bit more on this is showing that information respect to available paleoclimate hydrology. So what Reclamation did here, they're actually using 5 different paleo records based on these sources here at the bottom. And they're kind of overlapping here in the lines here. And then they overlaid this 22-year average period, their most recent 22 average in the top chart, and then the most recent 10-year period in the bottom chart. And so you can see that even under, the record as far back as we can go, which is back to 800 AD, that we are at really historical dry climate conditions within the basin. And again, that is being reflected in what we're seeing in the system right now. So with that, I want to shift gears a little bit more on the kind of drill down into the two main reservoirs, so Lake Powell and Lake Mead. This is showing Lake Powell projected operations over the next couple of years through March of 2023. And there's a few lines here. So the green line we're seeing here is what we call a most probable forecast based on the expected hydrology. The darker blue line is a maximum probable, and then the red is the minimum probable. And so you can view the most probable kind of like a median or an average condition. So if we have average hydrology conditions over the next few years, what will a system look like? Excuse me. And some of the key take-home points here is on the left here, we see these different balancing tiers or release tiers. And so the way reclamation balances operation between Lake Powell and Lake Mead, looking at different criteria. And so when we fall into this mid-elevation release tier, then the future releases, so the next year's releases will be about 7.5 million acre feet, which is actually less than the consumptive use demands in the lower basin. So it has significant impacts. And what we're seeing here is by October of this year, we are expecting that Lake Powell will be at a level lower than since when it first began filling in the mid 60s. So we're kind of at an all-time, we're projecting basically an all-time historic low condition on Lake Powell by October of this year. And then projecting out, there might be some increases next winter, but then a decline after that. In terms of Lake Mead, so this is going downstream to Lake Mead. The thing I want to point out here in the same color codes in terms of the minimum, most probable, and maximum probable forecast. 1075 is actually a critical elevation in Lake Mead. That is the elevation where reclamation would start implementing what they call a tier 1 shortage. And that has not happened to date in the Colorado rivers. Lake Mead has not hit that 1075 elevation before, at least in the last 20 or so years under the modern kind of operating criteria. And so what we're seeing here is by actually next month in May, we are expecting that, yes, Lake Mead will reach that tier 1 shortage. And so beginning in calendar year 2022, reclamation will implement additional what they call tier 1 shortage criteria. So the states of Nevada and Arizona are required to reduce their demands by a certain amount. And now this is on top of currently under the current conditions, both Arizona and Nevada and Mexico for that matter are required to implement some voluntary water conservation measures under the recent drought contingency plans. So in total next year, we're looking at probably a reduction of about 600,000 acre feet in demands in the lower basin to accommodate these. And you can see the projected operations of Lake Mead are really to continue that kind of downward trend unless we have very wet year next year. California would not be hit with additional reductions until Lake Mead hits this 1045 level, but we're getting there if things continue on this path. So that just provides a bit of kind of background on where the system is now. And so now what I want to do is kind of jump into the governance side of the basin. And there's a lot to cover here. The river is managed according to a number of court decrees, regulations, rules, environmental requirements. Collectively, these are all referred to as the law of the river. I'm not going to get into those specific activities. That's like a whole presentation in itself. So what I'm really going to focus on are the different programs in place that are implemented to basically implement the law of the river. And for just organizational convenience, I've split this into these kind of 4 different categories, and I will walk through each of these. So the first one is looking at joint upper basin and lower basin decision-making. And these are, I have some highlights here of some of the different activities. I won't go into all these, but I will touch on a few of them. The first one is this basin states activities. So in the management of the basin, the 7 basin states have their principal appointees from each of the governors. And those are the people who are responsible for representing those states in discussions and negotiations related to management of the river. And so these decision-making is really made between these state representatives and the federal authorities, primarily reclamation through the Department of Interior. And the group is fairly ad hoc in nature, so they don't have like a regular monthly meeting or anything like that, but as issues come up, they gather and they discuss options for moving forward. And I'll talk a little bit about how that plays into these different programs. Another big program within the basin is what we call the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Program. Many of you are aware of the kind of high pulse flows that they've done through the Grand Canyon National Park. That is done under this program. And the overall purpose of the program is to develop long-term monitoring programs, to look at ways to kind of modify and look at how they're operating Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell to improve conditions for both Grand Canyon National Park and also the Glen Canyon Dam or Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. So in terms of decision-making, this is done through what they call the Adaptive Management Work Group. It's an actually official federal advisory committee, and it's appointed by people are appointed by the Secretary of Interior. And so, but it's a very large membership. So it does have the state representatives. It has NGOs, it has tribes, it has recreation interest, federal power interest. And so they collectively work together to develop different work activities and programs to improve those conditions. In addition to those high flows I mentioned, they also have implemented what they call macro invertebrate flows or bug flows. And so these are flows to improve the insect conditions downstream of the dam. And the idea there is the improvement in the insects will also improve the fisheries. They manage for both native fish downstream and also non-native like trout. So trout is another kind of big constituency, those interests. So there are actually trout management flows in the river. And then there's also managed for low summer flows. So these are all things that are handled through the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Program. Another significant program in the basin is the salinity control program. So this is done through the Colorado River Salinity Control Forum, and they also have a advisory council. These are kind of 2 separate but parallel groups. Generally, they are comprised of the same representatives. They have appointments from each of the governors of the 7 basin states, and each state has up to 3 members. And the overall goal of this program is to improve the long-term water quality in the river, primarily focusing on salinity or total dissolved solids. The chart here on the right shows kind of the color codes kind of show the different concentrations of salt within the river. And generally speaking, salinity increases as from upstream to downstream. So the further downstream you get, the higher the salinity. Although the dams like Glen Canyon and Hoover Dam do have some effect on that as well. There are some significant natural sources of salinity in the upper basin, the Dolores River for one, that provide, they feel that the researchers feel that up to half this salt load into the river is from natural sources. And these are from highly saline groundwater and other activities. So these, the Salinity Control Forum works to implement specific regulations. So there are compliance points under the Clean Water Act for salinity at Hoover Dam, Parker Dam, and Imperial Dam. And so every 3 years, the forum updates and implements a plan to improve the salinity conditions in the basin. And they have a number of projects primarily located in the upper basin to basically reduce both natural and human-caused salt loads to the river. Another big role in activity is responding to drought. And so there's a number of activities associated with this. Most recently, the 2019 drought contingency plans were developed by the basin states. And also kind of parallel to that, the country of Mexico developed a binational water scarcity contingency plan. So those were to address some of these conditions we're seeing on the river today. In addition to that, if you go back in time a little bit, in 2007, the parties came together and developed what they call the interim guidelines. And those also work to improve, set criteria for how those reservoirs are operated. Now, I think I am running a little late here, so I will try to speed up my, my presentation here. So upper basin decision making, I only have a few slides left. Upper basin decision making is through the Upper Colorado River Commission. They're a specific interstate agency established by the state legislatures and Congress. They include the 4 upper division states. In addition, the individual upper division states also have an active role in decision making within the upper basin. Lower basin decision making. So just highlight a couple of things here. One, the Secretary of Interior through Reclamation is the water master for the lower basin. So through the construction of Hoover Dam and also the All-American Canal, Reclamation is the sole contracting authority for the Colorado River for Arizona, California, and Nevada. And so they are responsible for all water accounting within those 3 states related to the Colorado River. In practice, Reclamation does consult very closely with the basin states plus the other stakeholders in terms of operational decisions. And this is most relevant when they develop their annual operating plans, where those are vetted through a large stakeholder process, just to lay out specifically how the reservoirs will be operated over the next year. I also want to highlight the Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program. This is actually a 50-year program. I believe it was implemented in like the mid-2000s. And its overall goal is to conserve 27 species along the lower river from Lake Mead to the border with Mexico, looking at aquatic and marsh habitat, riparian habitat, looking at bird and native fish species. So collectively looking across all those and improving the conditions. So a number of different programs are in place to basically increase habitat downstream of Hoover Dam to improve conditions for those species. Okay, and then just a few words on binational decision making. So on the river, decisions are made with the International Boundary and Water Commission. This is a binational group composed of both the United States and a Mexican section. Each are somewhat independent, but they work collaboratively to solve problems on the river. Their guiding document is the February 1944 treaty. And then there's a number of minutes that are associated with that treaty. The most recent minute is minute 323. And that lays out a number of activities, including things like improving the conditions of the river, the flow through to the delta of the Colorado with the Sea of Cortez. And how this has been worked in terms of decision making is the IBWC works with or sets up a number of work groups on different topics. So there's an environmental work group, there's a salinity work group, a hydrology work group, and they work through these. The different basin states, partners in Mexico, NGOs are part of several of these work groups to kind of develop solutions to some of the long-term problems and basically to implement those minutes. So with that, I know I went a little bit long here, but just want to summarize. So there are these different programs in place on the river to kind of face these challenges. They are somewhat separate from each other, although there's a lot of overlap in responsibility and participation. The federal government plays a significant role, particularly reclamation, through their operation of their main infrastructure like Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam. And right now we're gearing up for this process to renew the operating guidelines for Lakes Powell and Mead, which are set to expire at the end of 2026. And so that's taken a lot of attention right now and will be kind of center stage for the next several years. So with that, I think I'll end and we can answer any questions.
Rich, thank you very much. I actually have a question, and I'm inviting people to ask questions in the chat room or to raise your hands, or if you're visible, wave at me. The question I've got for you is, we're about to witness some current events, Rich. If for the first time ever, we're dropping below 1075, and it's going to mean some curtailment, non-voluntary curtailment of use. Do you expect there will be some noisy challenging of the allocations by those who get curtailed, or is it completely proportional across the board, or have the previous decisions set some priorities for which uses get cut more than others? A comment on that, if you would.
Yeah, so the operational guidelines for the river are basically have been negotiated. So starting with those 2007 interim guidelines that actually set up those different operating tiers, how much water would be released from the upper basin to the lower basin. And then it also did set up practices for conserving water, and then also when you would be required to have these more mandatory shortages. And so those are pretty well spelled out. So I don't think anyone in the basin, any of the agencies would dispute that. But going into this next set of negotiations for the next round of guidelines, and why these are important, these guidelines may be in place for 25 or 30 years. And so what we're experiencing today will definitely influence what people take into those discussions for the next round of guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Rhonda Kranz. You're muted, Rhonda.
You're muted.
Thank you. Rich, there are a lot of different groups, sort of similar in how they're put together, but also different, and they have different states that are involved. And how well do they work in general? Are there some that work better? Are there different formats that seem to work better?
Well, I'll say in my experience anyways, I know if you ask the tribes, they have definitely a different perspective on this, but Reclamation does a pretty good job of bringing in the different stakeholders around decisions. Like I mentioned, this annual operating plan that describes how the reservoirs are going to be operated. They bring in a whole group of stakeholders to participate in those. NGOs, tribes, and others are involved in those. I think there's different perspectives on where you sit at the seat of the table. There might be folks that feel like the states are kind of guiding everything, and that like NGOs or tribes need to have a higher, a standing at those discussions. So I think those are all things that need to be discussed.
Okay, good. Mariana Grossman, you didn't get a chance to field your last question. Do you want to speak it rather than have me read it from the chat room?
I could. I guess I have two different questions. One is, are there measures you can take, like banning lawns or other discretionary water uses, to really crank down on water use, make sure it's available for appropriate agriculture, or not watering cotton or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. So under those 2019 drought contingency plans, And even before that, there's this mechanism they called intentionally created supply. And what that really is code word for conservation. So it's voluntary conservation, but each of the different agencies that has a water right to the river can create this conservation supply under these different agreements, like the drought contingency plan. And so when Arizona has to, conserve certain amount of water under the drought contingency plan, they actually have to go through and create some kind of a program, whether it's a canal lining or it could be reduced turf in residential areas. All these things are developed, they're accounted for. So you have to have a plan and they're accounted for. And then you can get a credit on that conservation, and that would meet that requirement under the drought contingency plan, for example.
And then my second question is the impact of wildfires on water supply and quality.
Yeah, that can definitely have a very localized effect. It could, increase your silt or sediment flowing into the local rivers. So, of course, it'd take many years to really impact Lake Powell or Lake Mead, but upstream of Lake Powell, you have a number of smaller reservoirs that could definitely be impacted by silt or sediment. I'm sure there is additional water quality specific impairments as well. I haven't seen the information on that on the specific constituents, but that is definitely something we are looking at.
Okay, excellent. John Wells raised his hand.
I did. Rich, I'm wondering, we saw the curves you presented. How things are, the availability is on the downward slope and it has been for what, decades? But
Yeah.
So what do you think the future holds for the Colorado? Is that going to continue? And what are the projections given climate change and whatever? And is there going to be some societal disruption if it continues on that trend?
Yeah, well, it's very well documented that when they first created the allocation for the river, currently right now, the allocation of water is about 17.5 million acre feet a year, if you include upper basin, lower basin in the country of Mexico. But we know that from kind of recent hydrology that the more recent average supply is probably in the 14 million acre feet range, maybe 15 if you're lucky. It might even be lower under some of these projections. Could be a 12 million acre foot supply, to meet these allocations of 17.5 million acre feet. So obviously we know that that's probably not sufficient. And we've got a template in place. That's the good news. Is so through the implementation of these previous, what they call the interim guidelines back in 2007, this 2019 drought contingency plans, we do have this mechanism for essentially conserving water, voluntary contributions, but it's actually worked. We've been able to do that. So a big part of what I think we'll be looking at is doing a lot more of that. I think the basin states prefer to rely on these more voluntary measures rather than say, okay, we're just going to cut your water use every year by X amount. We feel like in those years where there's supply, maybe they can meet their full appropriation, but in the long term, probably there are going to be more years where you have to conserve a lot more water.
Okay, thanks.
That too was a very rich presentation. Really information, and in the
No
old,
pun intended, David.
no, I saw it once it was out there. The bubble was out of my mouth.
I think Abdul has a question as well.
The history of water in the West, as you know, has not always been harmonious. So I'm hoping that in the past generation and a half or two, there's been some evolution in the way we resolve conflict.
Yeah, and I do want to say something about that. The basin states actually have been very keen on consensus-based decisions. So, particularly the 7 states try to have a very uniform position on anything that happens, any position that we need to take. That doesn't mean everyone and everyone agrees with everything, but we do try for that consensus. And I think we're going to try our hardest to continue that in moving forward.
Excellent.
I think Abdul might have had a question.
Oh,
Yes,
Abdul, you have a question?
I do have.
Okay.
And Rich, my question was, I was just curious about your take on the governance in Colorado, in the Colorado River Basin versus Sacramento San Joaquin Basin in California, because I just instinctively felt that the governance is much better organized in Colorado. But is it that assumption is right or wrong?
Yeah, and kind of what I was alluding to just a minute ago, I have found, because I have worked on both sides, the state more California focused, and then this more interbasin or intrastate process. And the Colorado River is so far it's been a fairly collaborative process. The federal government is playing a very strong role in there. The 7 basin states, the different stakeholders, everyone kind of wants to work collectively towards the goal. And so that does give me some hope. And I'll let you decide if that's happening on the California specific side or not. So
That's great. Well, Rich, thank you very much for that. We have one more short thing to do that's on your agenda, and it's to invite a conversation about a couple of questions, which I am going to put into the chat room. I just remember we used to have weekends. We're about to have one now, but you might not notice it because we schedule these Zoom meetings whenever everybody concerned can make it. So I'm doing them Sunday afternoons and Saturday mornings. Here comes a question to everybody, and I will say what it is. Or did it get up there yet? No, it didn't get up there yet. Enter. There we go. Take a peek at the chat. I have 2 questions that we, the steering committee, would like to hear from you on either now or by email. In the early years and the middle years of the roundtable, it was not uncommon for an organization to say one of 2 things. We'd like to have or support or participate in or present at a roundtable meeting on a certain topic or range of topics. And this was often how we ended up designing our meeting. It was often influenced by what location are we? Are we in California? Are we in New England? Or are we in the greater Washington, D.C. area, etc.? So local, we would like to have a local flavor when we did those meetings. We're now, by being virtual, we're everywhere at once. But question 1 is, what topics of information would be of greatest interest to you and or your organization for a future workshop? And I think before I open it up to any comment on that, by the way, you're always welcome to send an email about this. Our email is info@sustainableroundtable.org. It's quite easy. Info@sustainableroundtable.org. So we would always be attentive to suggestions. The second question, and anybody has comments, we can discuss them together because they're related. Within your organization or field of interest, do you have an upcoming project or set of data or indicators or a policy launch related to resource sustainability or resilience that it would be of value to you to get some in-camera feedback to on what your draft publication or draft idea or draft indicators are? When we did live meetings, we would say, no comments for attribution, please. Our proceedings will only reflect what the organization presenting the draft would like to have said about this. And so in some cases, what we presented in the proceedings was their final data set or final report or final public launch of a policy so that they were able to get their input in camera. In other cases, people say, could we use a SWR meeting as one of the places we publicize this through your list of several hundred people and then in turn the networks of those several hundred people. So either pre-completion or post-completion, we are at your service, even though we're in a virtual world. I imagine someday we'll have live meetings again, but they probably will be hybrids. And we'll find ways to make them in camera or part of them in camera if that's what you need. So I open it to comments either now or by email on this. I don't think this will take us a long time. I just wanted to hear from you. Any hands up or chats or waving of arms? Abdul Khan.
This is not related to the second part of your question, but the first part, I put that in. You know, after listening to Rich, I think how interesting it would be if we could have a water governance, workshop where we have presentation from multiple states, maybe 10 states in the US, some East Coast, some West Coast, some in the middle. So I'm I'd be really interested to learn about what's happening with water governance across the states in the US. Thank you.
That's very good. And I see lots of comments in the chat. Thank you. I'm getting tired of hearing my own voice. Does somebody on the steering committee want to read the things in the chat room, or you can all read them to yourself? Here's some good ones.
Bob's got a hand up too.
Okay, Bob, go ahead, unmute yourself and share.
Yeah, I was gonna toss out the issues of, I'll call it reservoir sustainability, but this is, many of our older reservoirs are filling up with sediment. They're doing their engineered function. And yet this is the most cans that gets kicked down the road and nobody wants to deal with. One of the old committees, you mentioned, Dave, the old days of the advisory committee. There was one out there for sedimentation.
Yes.
They're still functioning in a different way, similar to you guys. And, this continues to be an issue, I'm going to say, that may, benefit from broader discussion or awareness or engagement. The committee has put out a lot of good products over the years, guidance documents and other things. But keeping this issue out in front, because it's also a climate change issue, because a full reservoir can't meet its function of storing water or flood control. And so I think there's going to be a lot of activity there looking at things like, how do we dredge? What do we do with the sediments? If we have wildfires and debris flows, how do we deal with that? Here in Colorado, that's a huge issue for municipalities and whatnot on their water storage structures. So that may be something worth looking at.
I
and
think
there could be
it's really
partners
worth looking at. I would just like to highlight something that Bob said in one sentence, and that is, when a reservoir has significant sedimentation, then when you're looking at the altitude level of the water surface, you may think you've got X amount of water. You don't. Some of it is sediment. And secondly, if you are looking at your total capacity for flood control, should there be a major rush of water in some regions, you have less capacity to hold water than you thought you had. I imagine the administrators of a particular reservoir have an idea of what's in a given reservoir, but the people downstream and in a region may be totally unaware of the implications of this issue, which on the surface sounds technical, but really has major implications. Thank you for raising that.
You bet.
Rhonda.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm reading Alexandra's suggestion here, and I'm wondering if you have anything more to say about it. I think that sounds really interesting.
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're given that one of my focuses has been on coastal communities, but just looking at, we used to do a lot in New Orleans, and we had some some great meetings there with what was going on, updates from people in this community. I'd love to see what new solutions to disaster resilience in coastal communities that other people are working on. So I'm not sure if I have a more pinpointed thing to ask. I mean,
It sounds like there was more going on before, but there hasn't been recently, and it would be good to have some kind of a place that could help make that happen. I mean, I think that makes sense for us, to set up something where that might be an interesting thing to do.
yeah, I mean, we're dealing in Santa Monica right now with some issues with along the coastal line, power, utility storage of natural gas, and dealing with things like the Bologna wetlands where we have inundation of water. And now we're looking at issues with seepage into local community and potential fire disaster. So that kind of, like, where do we go from here? Are there other solutions people are using? I'm usually pretty good at researching all of this, but I'd love to hear from the perspective of other people in this community.